All right, everybody. Logan Alec here. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Mark Phillips. He is the Vice President of Business Development at Helium. If you saw my video reviewing the Helium Hotspot, you already know what Helium is. If you didn't see that, that's okay, because we're going to cover a lot of the basics around Helium and the People's Network today with Mark. We're also going to cover some of the basic elements of mining helium and how you could potentially get started with that if you want to do so. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, Logan. Good to
Thank
have
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. So, how I like to kick some of these interviews off is, my grandma, she watches all my YouTube videos. So if you
Sure.
just had to kind of distill down what helium is, what People's Network is to my 81-year-old grandmother, how would you do that? How would you explain this helium concept and the company?
Yeah. So perhaps surprisingly, there are actually a lot of grandmothers, grandfathers, family members that are actually out there running hotspots right now and being part of the People's Network. So this conversation is happening all over the world, quite frankly. So to date, wireless networks have been built by large companies spending tens of billions of dollars on infrastructure. You see radio towers all over the place. Helium has built something fundamentally different, where we're enlisting a community, people, right, to build this people's network. And so instead of building a cellular infrastructure that costs tens of billions of dollars a year to maintain, we're building something for small devices that send things like temperature data, humidity data, location data, and it's built from the ground up by the people. So by your grandmother, by my father, by my brother, by my uncle. And so what we're seeing is that when someone starts to deploy a hotspot, and I think you've got one now running maybe.
I do.
You talked about that in your last video. I suspect what you'll do is you'll start talking to your family members and you'll sort of branch out into networks. You'll say, hey, listen, this is easy to install, deploy it real quickly, and you can be part of the People's Network. And so that's happening all over the world, and that's fundamentally different than what anyone's ever done for wireless networks.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about your story. How did you get involved with this helium project? Were you there from day one? Did you come on board later? Could you tell us a little bit about your personal history with helium?
Yeah, happy to. So I was fortunate enough to join Helium very early. So Amir Halim and Sean Fanning founded the company in probably June of 2013. And I joined shortly after in January of 2014. Sorry, founded in 13, I joined in 14. And my background had been developer growth and adoption for a database company before that. And one of the early employees at Helium was a guy named Sean Carey, who also worked at my previous company with me. And he said, hey, we're starting this crazy wireless network infrastructure play. We'd like you to come over and do business development. And so that's how I got involved.
Awesome. Okay. So how does helium actually make money? We talked a little bit, touched on building the network. We're going to talk more about that later, about mining and getting your hotspot and all that. But what is helium's revenue model? How does it make money?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And so in my role as head of business development, I get this question constantly because we're building something that no one's ever seen, right? At the same time, it's a blockchain-based decentralized network. But I think what sets us apart from a lot of these blockchain systems is that there is an actual use case, which is sending data from devices and sensors that are informing people how to live their lives and sort of change the way that they act.
Right.
So Helium builds sort of two things in parallel. We sort of instigate the creation of this decentralized wireless network with people like you operating hotspots. Us and the community develop the blockchain components, all open source and freely available. And then on the business development side, we build relationships with big companies that are deploying sensors at scale. So there's a bit of a traditional aspect there where someone will come to us and say, okay, I'm going to put 20,000 parking sensors in the field. This just happened recently with a company called Nobel Systems. And those deployments require support and services. And so Helium will step in and say, sure, we'll give you developer engineering time to help you prototype the application, and then we'll help you sort of scale it out. So that's where it looks like from the sort of revenue perspective. It's a bit more traditional.
Okay, got it. So in a very general sense, would you say that helium, because I've heard of this thing called Amazon Sidewalk. I don't have any Amazon devices, but I've heard of it. It kind of, at least the way I understand it, it's like, okay, all these Amazon devices, they can kind of act as something like I don't know if I'd say hotspot, or I don't know the exact terminology, but is helium kind of similar to that concept? Is Amazon Sidewalk kind of considered competition to helium, or could you kind of address that question?
I can. I'll say it's a bit complicated.
Okay.
So when Amazon entered the market with Sidewalk, it was a very good thing. because they're using similar technology to what the Helium network uses, something called LoRaWAN.
Okay.
There's actually something called LoRa and LoRaWAN. LoRa is the wireless modulation technique. LoRaWAN is how you send data over that wireless link. So Amazon Sidewalk came out and said they're using LoRa. Everybody got very excited. But it's fundamentally different from what Helium and the People's Network were building. So, we're very much open, decentralized, built by you and your grandmother, and larger companies putting a lot of coverage up there, whereas Amazon is sort of building something closed and centralized. From a pure use case perspective, they're going after a slightly different target application. So they're not actually trying to create large, broad coverage, right? Again, back to your original video, you put that hotspot in a very good location, you're probably going to get 25 square miles worth of coverage just out of that window with that small antenna. Conversely, with Sidewalk, they're asking you to opt in to make your device, listen for public traffic. These things are deployed under desks. They're in people's back, closets and offices. They're not creating very good coverage. So they're primarily there to enable Amazon and their partners to sell more sensors into your house, which, is a great use case and probably makes people's lives better. But it fundamentally sort of goes against what Helium is building, which is this open, decentralized infrastructure.
Okay. So tell us about some of the, practically speaking, some of the use cases and partnerships that Helium has been able to develop recently.
Yeah, so there's two that have been on my mind recently because they're exciting but also very new in my mind. One is from a company called Helium Systems. I just mentioned them previously. They build, so they're a systems integrator, but they just did a large deployment on Helium for parking spot sensor monitoring. So they use a sensor from the LoRaWAN ecosystem called a PlacePod. I don't have one here, but it's like this super cool hockey puck looking thing. You drill a hole in asphalt, put the sensor in the ground, and this uses magnetic resonance to detect whether or not there's a car above it. And so when there is, it sends a signal back over the Helium network. It could be 100 feet away from a hotspot. It could be 2 or 3 miles. Their first deployment is in Los Angeles, which has amazing coverage. Los Angeles is wildly sprawling and huge, but our community has nearly covered the entire thing.
Wow.
So a car will roll over a spot in Huntington, California. It will send a signal back to their cloud-based application through the Helium network that says, hey, this spot is occupied. And they'll take it out of the app, for example, when someone wants to drive into Huntington Beach and book a spot. So that's one use case I'm super excited about. And so they just started about 2 months ago, and they're creating huge public coverage because their hotspots are deployed on light posts, for example, in a city with big antennas. And they create probably 20, 30, 40 square miles worth of coverage just from that one hotspot. And I think they started with 15 hotspots.
Wow, okay.
So that's one I'm quite excited about. The other one is a company called Victor Mousetraps. So we just did a bunch of news about this. So Victor is part of a larger company called Woodstream. They do hundreds of millions of dollars worth of revenue. They're based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They built quite literally a smart mousetrap. There's all those jokes about better mousetraps. They actually went out and built it. And they sell the most mousetraps of any company in the entire world.
Okay. And
so they saw this change coming a few years ago. They started with a Wi-Fi based trap that someone like you could buy, put in your home, and get a notification on your phone that said, hey, there's a rodent that's been captured in your basement. So they recently built a new version on Helium and LoRaWAN, where it does very much the same thing, but now has much longer range and will run much longer on a single battery. So they're selling to people like you and me, but also to pest control companies that will go in, deploy 5 or 6 traps. It'll be within range of the Helium network. And then the only time you have to service this thing is when you get a notification on your phone. And that data that powers the notification comes from the trap itself over the Helium network.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
I love this use case. It's my favorite thing so far.
Yeah, there's so many applications. It seems like that. From mousetraps to everything else. Okay, so that sounds super exciting. Now let's shift into the part of this conversation where I want to talk about a subject that I know a lot of my audience is interested in, and that's mining HNT, the Helium cryptocurrency. So I guess just kind of backing up here, what are the incentives? Why would someone want to get one of these hotspots, set it up in their home? What's in it? I know there's this bigger picture here, but what's kind of in it for them on a personal level?
Yeah, so there's 2 primary incentives. The most straightforward one is that you get to mine this token called HNT. And we produce 5 million of these a month. In August, we'll drop that to 2.5 million per month with the first halving, which is a very sort of blockchain crypto specific concept. And at this point, about 67 or 66% of all tokens mined go to people like you operating hotspots and creating the infrastructure. So HNT is a primary driver. But what we're finding, and we actually have good data on this from our hundreds of thousands of community members, people just want to be part of this. They want to be part of something new, something that's entirely different. And so there is a fundamental thing here where it's not just driven by the idea that you could mine this reward, HNT, but that you can be part of something brand new that is sort of taking the entire world by storm. I mean, we've built the largest contiguous wireless network in the world in just 18 months with a model that no one had ever done before. So those are the two primary incentives.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about the HNT cryptocurrency, the token. How closely is the price of HNT? Because it's gone up quite significantly in the past couple months, like multiple X. How closely is the value of HNT driven by the success of the Helium model as as a company and its success versus simply the mere speculation that's very common when it comes to cryptocurrency?
That's a good question. So Helium is focused on building the value of the network ecosystem, and we've constructed the token itself, HNC, HNT rather, to only be useful inside of the ecosystem itself. So the token is mined by the blockchain. They're pushed out as rewards to operators on the network, and then in turn, those tokens are used as a utility to pay transaction fees on the network. So when you send HNT back and forth, when you onboard a hotspot, when you assert the location of a hotspot, and then most importantly, when you actually send data from a sensor. So that's kind of how we think about it. Our focus is to ensure that the token is useful inside of the context of the Helium blockchain. Things happen outside of our control when it comes to things like exchanges and marketplaces. We don't have anything to do with that. We sort of just, we keep our heads down and keep building the network. And again, we try to deliver something that increases in value for our ecosystem partners and gives companies like Victor Mousetrap a reason to actually use the network. But for us, that focus is building coverage and making it usable and making sure that the blockchain itself has something to keep it running, which is HNT.
So, let's take Victor Mousetrap. Did they have to? How do they have to acquire HNT in order to use the Helium network?
So they do, but they don't actually have to mine it directly if they don't want to, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So typically what happens is when someone decides to deploy on Helium, we do have coverage in, I think, 3,500 cities and 6,200 countries at this point. But for a wide-scale deployment, we're not going to be everywhere that you need to be. So people tend to deploy coverage either sparsely, sort of dot it here and there where it's needed, or they deploy a lot of coverage. We like it both ways. And so what happens when these companies start deploying coverage, they mine HNT, and then they end up using that HNT to pay the transaction fees for the sensor traffic. These are called data credits. So data credits are, again, you explained this in your previous video, and you actually did quite a good job of it. I think you've done a better job than most people do with it.
Thanks.
The price of data credits is fixed against the US dollar. It doesn't float. So with Victor Mousetraps, for example, if they know that they have 1,000 mousetraps in the field that only send 2 packets a day, they're going to need 2,000 data credits per day. And they can quickly take US dollars and acquire the number of data credits that they need. Or they can use their own HNT and they can burn it in a transaction, so it's called a burn transaction, to what's called their Helium console organization, which is just a web UI for managing devices on the network. And then they can make sure that their devices have plenty of data credits through that. So we've tried to strike a balance between a very interesting sort of crypto economic model. Technically, it's called burn and mint, and I'd encourage you and your viewers to go check it out. But we understand that we're dealing with enterprises who in a lot of ways just want to send data from a mousetrap back to a web application. Right. So we built some abstractions over it, like Helium Console, and the idea of using a credit card to buy data credits. What happens in the background is Helium just burns HNT on your behalf. So we do end up taking that HNT out of the ecosystem. But if they want to take their own HNT and burn it, it's entirely very straightforward.
Got it. Okay. Let's get into kind of practically speaking here about kind of maximizing HNT rewards. Because you know, I think my hotspot I explained in the video, it's making me maybe between 0.1 and 0.3 HNT rewards a day. I think that could be a function of, okay, it's I'm not in the middle of Los Angeles where there's, like, you know, all these other hotspots around where I can witness proof of coverage challenges. I'm kind of in a suburb of LA. I think there's only like 6 or 7 like active hotspots in my town. So I know there's a function of that. But then I see in the discussions, like on the Helium Discord and various Helium Facebook groups, people talking about getting like an antenna, you know, that could theoretically help, you know, what they're witnessing. I guess kind of practically speaking, I know every situation is different, but generally speaking, how do you know if an antenna could possibly, you know, help your helium mining and HNT rewards?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And quite frankly, if you spend any time in Discord, this is probably the most often asked question.
Yeah.
And I think we're up to 21,000, you know, people in there at this point.
It's like the messages are like, everyone's asking about it. It's almost overwhelming for me to kind of pick through it and say, oh.
No, Discord is quite overwhelming, but we're doing some things to make it a little easier to use. So on the antenna issue, one thing I'll say, or I guess the bigger question about rewards and maximizing your HNT mining. So every coverage area on the network started with 0 hotspots, right? We're up to 25,000. We have a tremendous amount in the backlog, which maybe we'll talk about after. So when people come in and say, hey, I live in the middle of nowhere, there's no coverage here, I'm only going to make, as you mentioned before, 0.1, maybe 0.3 HNT per day. What is the reason why I would even want to do this? And my response is what I just said. Every city started with 0 hotspots. You know, Austin, San Francisco, London, all of these places started with 0 hotspots. If you look at the coverage map today, for example, there's hotspots lighting up all over China. We just had our first distributor ship hotspots to China. And so there's 0 coverage out there as of last week. It's going to grow super fast. And so when you're deploying hotspots, the network rewards you for, there's the map there. So when you're deploying hotspots, the network rewards you for good, robust coverage and proof of coverage, which is our equivalent of proof of work, well, not the equivalent, but sort of our version, wants you to be able to prove that you're actually providing coverage. So when you're in your situation, have you heard the term lone wolf before, Logan?
I have seen it in discussions like in the Discord or Facebook. It's like someone, in layman's terms, someone kind of out in the middle of nowhere, right? There's no hotspots around.
It's someone who's just getting something off the ground, right? You're by yourself.
Right.
And you're in that situation, although you are provided wireless coverage, I can't prove it, right? The blockchain can't prove it because we have no test to it. Right? So you have no sort of geographic peers to come in and quite literally witness packets that your hotspot is sending, little signals that get sent out periodically. Right. But what you can do is instigate a challenge on the network, and that's valuable to us. And so if you look through your Explorer view, we'll show you all the challenges that you're a part of, and you get compensated by the network in the form of HNT for issuing those challenges.
All right, so this is San Francisco. I clicked on one of these green spots here. And this is all public. Explore.helium.com/coverage. Anyone could look on here and see, you know, the details of a hotspot and what it's mining. And okay, so this one, I don't know what's going on. It looks like it has mined some in the last 5 days, but for some, maybe this isn't a good example because it doesn't look.
That's fine. We can use that one. That's not a terrible example. What's the name? I always like to look at the name.
It is Curved Carat 90. These names are super fun too.
Yeah, the naming scheme is actually one of the most accidentally successful things on the network, quite frankly. It's just based on underneath that you see that long string there. That's the public key of the hotspot. We just do what's called, we hash it and produces these names based on a library, which is open source. So this is San Francisco. Hilariously, we get a lot of people requesting to change their names. Sadly, we cannot do it. So if you scroll down, you've got some things here. Let's pick something. Okay, so if you click on that mining reward for 0.06 HNT, so this is similar to something that I imagine your hotspot is bringing in,
right?
Which is a challenger.
I see a few of these throughout the day.
Right. So this means that you are submitting a challenge to the network. You're basically saying, hey, hotspot somewhere in the middle of nowhere, I need you to go prove that you're creating coverage, and that kicks off this challenge. That to us is valuable, right? Because you're causing the network to sort of look at its coverage quality And this is a transaction for distributing HNT, by the way.
Okay.
This happens every 30 minutes, give or take.
Okay. Got it.
So when it comes to optimizing antennas, certainly people should consider doing this. I will say that at least the Helium hotspot, now there's more manufacturers, but with the Helium hotspot, it is quite good. It's small, but it's a beast, quite frankly. Where you might want to consider adding an antenna would be where you might be, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 miles from some other hotspots. And perhaps sending out signal with a little bit more power output might give you some advantage. And if that's the case, you're witnessed by these other hotspots, and yes, your HNT rewards will increase. So that's generally why you might want to consider it.
Okay, got it. All right. Yeah, because I was thinking of creating some content where I get antenna and kind of just test to see if it if it helps. So I might do that.
It's wild because we've basically recruited an ecosystem of people who are largely like yourself, who are intelligent but might not have experience with wireless and antennas and radio frequency.
Yeah.
And they're learning things very quickly. It's fascinating to watch.
I think I'd be probably most comfortable hiring an electrician for this job personally.
Definitely recommend hiring an electrician. Do not hesitate to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess, and they install antennas all day. I mean, this wouldn't be something terribly.
Plus, you get to teach them about helium when they show up.
If I look at the helium coverage map here, just kind of right now, if I hit the back, right now there are over 24,000 helium hotspots worldwide. Mostly in the United States and Europe, and as you mentioned, there's now some coverage in China over here. Where does Helium want this number to be by the end of 2021?
Obviously, we want it to be as big as possible.
Right.
I can tell you that the network is, although it's the fastest growing wireless network probably in history, I'm just going to make that up, but no one can disprove it, so here we are.
There you go.
We've actually struggled to grow as fast as we could have because of supply chain issues with hardware, both LoRaWAN, again, that's our wireless component, LoRaWAN specific components, and also just general hardware manufacturing. There's a shortage of something called an oscillator, for example, that has even Apple sort of crippled. And that trickles down 4 layers deeper to the Helium ecosystem, and that has actually made us grow a lot slower than we knew that we could. That being said, so there's 25,000 deployed now. There are probably about 120,000 hotspots from all 5+ manufacturers in the ecosystem in the backlog. Meaning people have paid for these and are excited to deploy them, and they're waiting for them. And so those should start shipping. I mean, I just mentioned we're shipping in China now through a partner called Bobcat, which is the best hotspot name I've ever seen. They started shipping today. All the other manufacturers with backlog, Nebra, Rack and CalChip, Syncrobit should start shipping in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So that will sort of alleviate some of the coverage pressure. I anticipate that end of year we see at least 150,000 hotspots.
Wow.
I'd like that number to be bigger, but it should be 150,000 plus.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, super exciting. I think just when I started. Like when I set up my hotspot, like just a few weeks ago, I think this number, I think thousands have been added just in the past couple. And you said so many are back ordered too, like an immense amount are back ordered. That's crazy.
You can actually see we have a chart somewhere. If you go back to the Explorer page, and so here's our growth chart here.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So and like I said, things would have we're adding 1,000 every few days now, but we're literally only capped by supply. The demand is bonkers.
Right.
So we're working as close as we can with manufacturers to see how quickly they can ship more stock. And so this is actually really interesting to look. So we were talking before about how Helium thinks about the token. This is one of the best things to sort of look at in terms of that. So I mentioned that HNT is constructed as a utility with a blockchain. Right? We mine HNT and we use it to ensure that the network continues to run. So, for example, in the bottom right, you have that square there. It says Helium Inc.
Yeah.
And you've got a huge number, 507,180.26 HNT burned. So what that means is Helium Inc., in order to onboard all the hotspots that we produce, I think there was a 17,000 or 20,000, the numbers above it. We actually took our own HNT and burned it as a transaction fee to onboard all these hotspots.
Hmm.
So you're going to see all these manufacturers, both ones listed here, and then about 3 or 4 other ones that are in the queue to become approved. There's a process for that. They will, be using the token as we intended, as a transaction fee to basically keep the network operating as it's supposed to. So this is one of my favorite views in the entire Explorer. It doesn't get too much visibility because it's kind of hidden and it's relatively new, but this is super cool to look at.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't really explored this. Probably, offline. I'll take another look at this later today. One thing I did want. Wow. So looking at the chart here, the growth. Yeah, beginning of March, less than 20,000. Today, over 24,000. That's just phenomenal. And like you said, this isn't fully representative of the demand, because the demand is huge, but it's just, for various reasons, supply chain or whatnot, they haven't been able to get out the door from these third-party manufacturers as quickly as obviously these potential miners want them to.
That's so right. A little more comment on that last screen. You have to go back to it, but in the spirit of being totally open and decentralized, you can see exactly how many hotspots a manufacturer is distributing, because they have to actually burn the HNT for each one of them. So there's a massive number. For example, CalCheck, there's 24 billion DCs there, data credits. That means that they've loaded up their Helium wallet via burning with 24 billion data credits. And that's good for another 4,800 hotspots to be added to the network. It's the most transparent thing in the wireless world. You can see exactly who's selling how many miners and who's deploying how many miners. It's super cool.
Awesome. Before we wrap up here, I had some questions from my audience who were wondering about mining Helium. So let's go to the first one here. All right, so Stephen Means asks, thank you for this info. I've had some interest in crypto mining. My only question is, how will this financially affect your energy consumption versus the rewards you get from the mining? So if you could just kind of address that.
That's a good question. So at a higher level, what's fascinating about Helium is that I think we've done more to introduce people to the idea of mining a cryptocurrency than any technology ever to date. What I mean by that is, if you want to mine Bitcoin, for example, or ETH, you have to go out and spend thousands of dollars on a very big piece of equipment. And if you do it at scale, you have to buy a lot of these things. And it always requires power. Companies are getting funded just to move to different parts of the country and the world where there's low power costs. Helium is entirely different. Not only is it easy to mine HNT, meaning the barrier to entry is $200 from one of these approved manufacturers. You plug it in power and you get a backhaul, Wi-Fi or Ethernet. You're up and running in like 10 minutes. The power cost is negligible. I think in a market like San Francisco, it's the equivalent of $5 or $6 a year. It draws about 5 watts. Yeah, if you want to model it, you can put it in your monthly expenses, and you can put 40 cents a month for the HNT power draw. But it's negligible power, it's negligible data backhaul. You won't notice it on your data usage. But again, we have tens of thousands of individuals who have never really heard of cryptocurrency before getting into Helium, and they're mining a token. Most people in crypto don't mine tokens.
Right.
They buy them. Mining is not easy to do. It really changes.
Right. Yeah, I've never mined BTC or ETA. I watch these videos on YouTube as entertainment, but I've never personally done it, because I feel like there's a pretty large investment up front. Energy, heat, there's all these things you have to worry about that. But with the Helium Hotspot, it just, it sits right there on looking out the window, and it's just does its thing. All right, another question from the audience, from my viewers here. This one is from Wayne Montgomery. He asked, can you ask Mark about doing this with Maritime AIS equipment? He says, my nonprofit operates 75 antennas at various sites and locations around the country. They host Maritime AIS equipment for a number of companies such as Fleetmon, Marine Traffic, and Vessel Tracker. So he's just wondering about, are integrating Helium hotspots at his sites and his kind of antenna spots, is that something that would potentially be viable to earn the Helium token?
So the answer to Wayne's question is absolutely, right. So I don't know much about Maritime AIS, but I can sort of guess that you're deploying some sort of radio coverage to monitor things moving around. And I'm guessing if it's maritime, you're going to have very good locations for these antennas. Meaning, they're probably up high. They've got very good view of the sky. They're probably near water, which is fantastic. LoRaWAN and the Helium network signal travels so far over water. Pretty much, you're limited by the horizon. So yes, you should absolutely look into deploying hotspots at these locations. If they're outside, companies are now building these ruggedized units that can be deployed outside and operate fine. And you can also use cellular backhaul for the data, meaning you won't be tied to a Wi-Fi or Ethernet network, although I suspect you probably have hardwired connectivity at these sites of yours. So happy to talk with you about this if you want to email me or just hop into our Discord, but you should absolutely pursue it.
All right. That sounds great. Mark, those were all the questions I had. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of share with viewers about Helium or mining or anything like that?
I think we covered exactly what someone needs to know to sort of get deeper into the community. One thing I always like to end with is, we do have this wildly active Discord community. People should absolutely join. Maybe we can get a link in the show notes if you haven't done that yet.
I will there's a link in the description down there.
Perfect, yes. And so if you're looking to get involved and just have basic questions, that is absolutely the best way to learn. As Logan mentioned, or as you mentioned rather, it is certainly a bit of a fire hose. And so if people show up and are a little bit overwhelmed, find me. I'll be pretty easy to find. But that's what I end up.
Yeah, with the Discord, the search function is your friend. Because people are just so willing to share information in there about their experience. People are excited about this. I'm excited about this. I'm not, even a huge crypto guy, but I'm excited about this. So, definitely the Discord. Search for what you're looking for, and you should find. I use the Discord when I'm setting up my hotspot. I had an issue, and someone responded literally within like 10 minutes, and I got an answer, and it fixed the problem. So, all right, Mark, thank you so much for coming on here and talking with me today. I'll let you know, and I'll let my audience know that I did talk to Nebra, and they're going to be sending me a sample hotspot to review. Thinking about putting that in a rental property across town, or maybe at a friend in the neighborhood if I can do some convincing there. So
for your grandmother's, if she's up for it.
That's right, yeah. So I'm definitely excited about that. So thank you again, Mark, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Yeah, thanks, Logan. It was a pleasure.